Welcome to One Chosen, where we use our scripture foundation in order to discuss current topics as being led by the Spirit. In part 1, we expose the truth on the appearances of many public figures in Britain. However, in this episode, we are going to use our research through written texts on how the monarchs of Britain looked, such as the kings, the queens, and the rulers. So let's go. This is Psalm chapter 85, verse 11. It reads, "Truth shall spring out of the earth, and righteousness shall look down from heaven." So the scripture's telling us there's going to be a time when truth will spring out of the earth. The truth will expose all the lies and all the cover-ups that was used against us. And believe it or not, we're living in this time right now, because you can access information by a click of a button. If there was a terrorist attack thousands of miles away, you'll get that report within seconds. So in regards to our current condition, we're living in the blessed age in regards to information. But relating this to this topic, we're going to continue to fulfill this scripture by exposing the truth. Let's go. So we'll start this off with Queen Elizabeth I. She's the daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. You might have seen a few movies on her, with the white makeup and the ginger hair. Well, we're going to expose how she looked. So this comes from a book called The Life of Elizabeth I on page 16. It reads, Elizabeth was 25 years old at her ascension. She was tall and very slender, with a tiny waist, small bosom, and beautiful long-fingered hands, which pleased her vanity to display to an advantage in a variety of affected poses. She had a swarthy, olive complexion, like that of her mother, although she had a habit of whitening it with lotion made of egg whites, powdered eggshell, poppy seeds, borax and alum, which made her face appear white and luminous. I mean, how many punchlines do you need? It said she made a habit of whitening her skin to appear white. See? Didn't say she was white, it said to appear white. This is why the scriptures say there's nothing new under the sun. Because our people are whitening their skin today to look white, because they're not proud of themselves. I mean, back in this time, the reason why she whitened her skin is because it's a symbol of royalty. If you was darker skinned, you'd be looked at as a peasant, someone who was outside a lot. But that doesn't take away the fact that this verse said she had swarthy skin. And let me touch on that swarthy olive as well, because people today like to say, oh yeah, I'm olive skinned, I look Mediterranean. Well, olives only come in 4 complexions: black, brown, purple or green. And I don't know about you, but I haven't seen a green person yet on this earth. So if you're going to use that to say, oh, olive, I look Mediterranean, I look green. Well, the only green person I've seen is the Hulk. Obviously, when you use the phrase olive, you're actually referring to someone with a swarthy complexion. And the author stated that too. So let's go back to the quote. It said, she was of a swarthy olive complexion, like that of her mother. So if Queen Elizabeth I is swarthy, that means her mom's swarthy also. So who was her mom? Her mom was Anne Boleyn. And as you can see from the picture, you can immediately see the lies. So let's go into the quote. This quote is from a book called Mary Queen of Scots by Carol Schaefer. It's on page 40. It says, according to one contemporary, Madame Anne was not one of the most handsomest women in the world. She was of middling stature, swarthy complexion, long neck, wide mouth, bosom not much raised, and in fact had nothing but the English king's great appetite and her eyes, which were black and beautiful, and invited conversation. Her hair was glossy, thick and black, and she had a great deal of sexual magnetism. She was known for her venomous temper, rapacious ambition, and tendency towards hysteria. So that sounds like a black woman already. So what I want to do now is focus on the most least known facts which were described in this description. So let's firstly look at sexual magnetism. So around this period, preferably around the 1800s, which is about 2 centuries after Anne Boleyn, there was something known as bustles. It was basically a Victorian style of dress. But what you may not know, that these bustles was used to imitate the black woman's shape. It was particularly a woman called Sarah Bartman. She was an African slave from South Africa. So what they did is they used her to parade her body around London and Paris just because of the way she was shaped. Now this source comes from a journal called The Sarah Bartlett's Body Shape versus the Victorian Dress, The Untold African Treasures by Anne Mason. It reads, Sarah Bartlett's body shape, characterized by full breasts, narrow waist and extra large buttocks, was viewed by Europeans as ugly. Yet later on, the same body, though not acknowledged, was used to inspire the creation of the Victorian bustle dress that resembled her body in every aspect. I mean, that's crystal clear. I mean, I used to always wonder to myself, how come they're behind so big when they're wearing these dresses? It's later till I known that they was actually imitating the black woman. And this is what they like to say. They like to say that, oh, you know, bustles was used, you know, to prevent their dress from sliding across the floor. Well, that's a partial lie, because when you look at images of bustles, you see some of them where their dresses are sliding across the floor. I mean, I believe they're just using that as a mechanism to take away the acknowledgement that it was used to imitate the black woman's shape. But anyway, let's get back to Anne Boleyn. He said she had thick black hair. I mean, who has thick black hair today? I mean, that's a hair texture ranging from 3B to around 4C. You know, that kinky hair. Come on, man. He said she had a swarthy complexion also. I mean, looking at these images, do they look swarthy in complexion? No, exactly. So they're trying to tell a lie. They're trying to tell a false image of how Anne Boleyn looked. So if Anne Boleyn was swarthy, that will make her daughter swarthy also, which is Queen Elizabeth I. Here's an image of an original portrayal of Queen Elizabeth I's mum, Anne Boleyn. This is nothing you're going to get from Netflix or Hollywood. This is a real image of Anne Boleyn. Now look at her features. Broad nose, which is tried to distort by the way, and thick lips. Clearly an image of a so-called black woman. You're probably wondering, who the hell is this guy? Who is he trying to show with a full-blown afro? So let me tell you, this guy is Henry VIII. Yes, I said it. Henry VIII, the famous British monarch. You know, all the records that we just pulled on Anne Boleyn and Queen Elizabeth? Well, this is Anne Boleyn's husband. This is Queen Elizabeth I's father. This is a portrayal of him when he was 8 years old. And as you can see, Henry VIII has an afro. Now the question is, why don't they show you these images in movies, in commercial breaks, you know, in pictures or in museums? How come they never show you this image? What are they trying to hide? Obviously, they're trying to hide the black nobility in Britain. They're trying to block this out of history. You see, all these kings, all these queens, they won't tell you this. You'd have to dig it up. But the kings and the queens in Britain, majority of them, if not all of them, were so-called black people. So if you're wondering how Queen Elizabeth I was described as swarthy, well, her mummy, Anne Boleyn, and her daddy, King Henry VIII, was so-called black. I mean, look at this image of Henry VIII in the top left-hand corner. Clearly a broad nose and thick lips. Who's known throughout history with broad noses and thick lips? Obviously, the so-called black man and woman. And the reason why I say so-called is because we're not really black. We're actually brown. We're actually swarthy in complexion. So here's a close-up of King Henry VIII. You see the broad nose, the thick lips? I mean, here's another image. More of a darkened version of Henry VIII. Not a whitewashed version. So Henry VIII was a Tudor. So his daughter was a Tudor as well, Queen Elizabeth I. So when you look at shows like the Tudors, ask yourself, are they really showing the right images? Obviously not. So we read about the Tudors, which is King Henry VIII and Queen Elizabeth I. Now we're going to link another noble family called the Stuarts. Now this is from a book called History of Mary Stuart, and it's on page 88 by Joseph Adolphe. Just to give you a bit of background before we get into it, there's a guy called James Melville, who's a Scottish diplomatic representative for Mary Queen of Scots, and he has a conversation with Queen Elizabeth. So just pay attention to what it says in the passage. It reads, "The talk was frivolous and playful, yet Elizabeth always laboured to prove herself and her country indifferent to all that concerned Scotland. Melville was puzzled when the royal lady asked him whether she or Mary was beautiful. In the midst of all the frivolities, serious matter to her, she never was silent about her personal beauty. She dared to compare her swarthy complexion and hard profile with the wonderfully fresh and expressive features of Mary, and even claimed the advantage." So here's another source explaining that Queen Elizabeth I was of swarthy complexion. But this is the point I'm trying to make. Even at this time, our people was not even proud of their dark skin complexion, because it says she dared to compare her swarthy complexion. Remember earlier when we proved that Queen Elizabeth I was whitening her skin to appear white? Well, this is the reason why. She wasn't proud of her swarthy complexion, but she was comparing it to a woman called Mary. Now, who's Mary, you may ask? The Mary it's talking about is Mary, Queen of Scots, which is King James VI's mother. You know, the guy who authorized the Bible to get translated? Yeah, this is his mother right here. And if you can't see the features from this image, then I'll just have to spell it out to you. This is from a book called Negro Rulers of Scotland and the British Isles by Dr. John L. Johnson. On page 80, it reads, "The dark-haired Mary, with her mulatto appearance, she also wore ringlets of small curls, including many wigs, descended from a long line of dark-skinned Stuarts, whose lineage goes all the way back to Kenneth the Niger." I mean, you can already tell by his name that he's a so-called black man. Then it also says, she descended from a long line of dark-skinned Stuarts. So you mean to tell me that the Stuarts are black as well? I mean, this is something we can go over at a later video. But what I want to zoom in on is when it says she had a mulatto appearance. I mean, if you don't know what mulatto is, you can go over my last video that I did. I explained that mulatto is someone of mixed origin. So you can see by her hair, I mean, just look at her hair right here. It's clearly something of woolly texture. I mean, here's another image. They tried lighting this one up. But even with this image on the right, she looks more mulatto than the one on the left-hand side, with that ruddy brown complexion. So I didn't say it before, but this is actually Queen Elizabeth I's cousin. So now when we go back to the quote, when it said Queen Elizabeth I dared to compare her swarthy complexion, she was daring to compare it to her light-skinned cousin, Mary, Queen of Scots. And for those who are actually thinking out of the box, this is actually an ancient day way of saying team dark skin versus team light skin. You see, this is something you didn't learn from slavery. This is something that you was doing in your royal positions. You know, comparing your complexion. Oh, you know, I'm caramel. You know, I'm light skin, I'm pale. You know, oh, he's too dark. I mean, this is just ancient day tribalism, which is something that Negroes practice today. But I want to finish on this last verse in regards to Mary, Queen of Scots, because it's rumoured that she was doing the exact same thing as her cousin, Queen Elizabeth I. So this comes from a book called Mary, Queen of Scots and the Murder of Lord Donnelly by Alison Weir. And it reads, "Within the palace grounds still stands a small structure known as Queen Mary's bathhouse. This was only the building erected by Mary during her reign in Scotland. Legend has it that she bathed there in white wine in order to preserve her complexion, but the real history of the bathhouse is obscure." You see, she was doing the exact same thing, whitening her skin, as her cousin, Queen Elizabeth I. So she was doing it to preserve that so-called royal looking light skin complexion. I mean, if you look further into this book, or if you use another source, it says that Mary, Queen of Scots had pale skin. So you know the reason why now she had pale skin. So Mary, Queen of Scots is King James's mom. You know, King James, the guy who authorized the translation of the Bible. Yeah, this is his mom he was just talking about. And she married a guy called Lord Donnelly, or better yet, his real name was called Henry Stuart. So you know in school when you read about the Tudors and the Stuarts, well, the Stuarts were just a royal family from Scotland. And Henry Stuart, King James's dad, descended from these people. But the main point is I want to look into what these people actually look like, because the proof of what they look like is actually in the surname. I mean, today, scholars like to say that the word Stuart means guardian, when that's just the modern day definition. So let's look into an ancient definition of the word Stuart. So let's use our common sense and think to ourselves, what does the word Stuart really sound like? And if you haven't guessed it already, it sounds a lot like swart or swarthy. You see the resemblance? Swart, Stuart, swarthy, and that means black or brown. So the $1 million question is, does these people who are known today as the Stuarts, was they regarded as black or brown people? This is from a book called Origin of the Anglo-Saxon Race by Thomas William Shaw. It's on page 112. It reads, Stuart, there is another word used by the Anglo-Saxons to denote black or brown black, the word sweart. The personal names Stuart and Sewart may have derived from this word and may have originally denoted of a dark brown or black complexion. So the word Stuart does not mean guardian. By using the etymology of the word, it's actually denoting the skin tone of that person. So going back to the question I asked, could this mean that the Stuarts were of dark brown complexion? Yes, it does, because it means dark brown or a black complexion. The problem is today is that people actually take these surnames and names completely out of context by giving it a more modernized definition of the word. So is this my opinion or is this facts? Well, we'll see in this book. This is from a book called Ancient and Modern Britons by David McRitchie, and this on page 131. It reads, there must always be a little uncertainty attending such surnames as this. So it's regarding the word Stuart and other surnames like Duncan. And it says, its original meaning was undoubtedly black swarthy, but a time came when it ceased to denote complexion and passed into the class of ordinary meaningless family names. You see, it said ordinary meaningless family names. You see all these names you hear like Stuart, Neil, Nigel, Donald, Duncan, Douglas. These were names that were named after you. Names that were named after your skin tone, your complexion. But what did it say? In times past, it would cease to denote complexion. What do you think it means when they use the term Blackpool or Blacksmith or surnames like Brown or Moorside? It's denoting the complexion of the people in that region. What gets me is that you have Negroes today still believing that they're named after the slave master, when in actual fact, the slave master is named after you. He's the one who took on your names and changed the definition so that you couldn't identify with it. But we'll elaborate more upon this on another day. My point was this, that the word Stuart means black. It doesn't mean guardian. The author and the dictionary clearly stated this. So now, when you're looking at people like King James, because he was a Stuart, and it's now known the definition of the word, which means black or swarthy, by now observing these images, we clearly see that he's someone of dark complexion. I mean, look at the woolly hair, the broad nose. I mean, look at the thick lips as well. I know it seems like an episode of More of Povich, but it's a shame we have to do this. This is clearly a so-called black man you're looking at. Even from these images that you see, are you really telling me when the artist was depicting King James, he didn't have some knowledge on his appearance? Of course he did. They knew exactly how he looked when drawing him. But anyway, if you're still doubting this, let's deal with the authenticity of his son, because there's a famous saying, like father, like son. And that phrase doesn't just express the characteristics that the son has as the father, but the looks as well. So who was his son? His son was King Charles I, and if you dig up a bit of research about him, he was actually beheaded for treason. But what you're looking at right here is an image of King Charles I. And when looking at it, you might think, he looks white, but not so white. I mean, you can clearly see the broad nose, the thick lips. But let's compare this to a more modernized image of King Charles. Now, this is a more modernized image of King Charles. And you clearly see that the artist tried to, destroy the features he had, the broad lips, and make it look more modern European. But the big question is which image correlates to how he looked? Because images can speak a lot of things. You can think a lot of things from an image. But the actual description on how he looked says something else. So this is from a book called King Charles I by John Skelton. It's on page 50. It reads, Charles was about middle height. He had, what we are told, a brownish complexion. His hair was of a chestnut hue. His eyes were grey. You see? So it said what we are told, not what we think, or what we may see on TV or a Netflix TV show or on modernized pictures. It says what we are told. So this is fact. King Charles I had a brownish complexion. So now when we decipher the images and compare it to the image that was shown, we can clearly see that this guy doesn't even look brown. He looks white. So this image is a lie. So the real image of King Charles I was the one that I showed first. The one with the broad nose, the thick lips, and the one with a darker hue. So King Charles I was a so-called black man. He was not white. He had a brownish complexion, like the facts stated. So now, if you were paying attention, I said at the start, there's a famous saying that goes about, like father, like son. So if King Charles I was a brown complexion, what would that mean about his dad, King James I? Obviously, King James I must have been a brown complexion as well. So now, let's look at his son. And who's the his? I'm talking about King Charles I. Let's look at King Charles I's son, King Charles II. So here's an image of King Charles II on the left-hand side. From comparing the information we just read about his dad, King Charles I, some of you may have already clocked on that this image is a lie. This is from a book called King Charles II by Brian Arthur. This is on page 81. On Tuesday, May the 29th, the sun rose early to welcome the King's 30th birthday. Many thousands of subjects rose earlier. 100,000 heads looked down as Colonel Brown's regiment, silver doublets and black scarves, trotted by, but the roar drowned even the bells when the King rode into view. Here he was, at last, the black boy whom so many have secretly toasted and mentioned in bated breath and dreamt of. Tall, slim, and dark, he rode bareheaded between the dazzling crowd. So from the information we just read about his description, the first question will be is, does the image correlate to the text? No. Now the second question will be is, if he was a white person, when do white people call themselves black boys? I mean, there's a reason why there's pubs all over the UK in places like Shropshire and Birmingham called the Black Boys Inn or the Black Boy. Because it's not only showing you the appearance of that black person, which is dark skin, but it's also paying homage to King Charles II, who was called the Black Boy. I mean, some of us may just walk past this and say, you know what, this is just them showing, a slave person who was brought over here from, the Caribbean. It's just depicting a slave, when this could actually be a depiction of King Charles II. I mean, there's going to be some people out there who's going to look back at the information and say, he said that King Charles was tall, slim, and dark. And when it says dark, it's referring to the colour of his hair, because he was a dark-haired brunette. Wow, let's look up that word brunette and see what it truly means. Brunette, a woman of a brown complexion. So first things first, when you say the word brunette, it's actually referring to a woman. And the second thing is, when you say the word brunette, it's referring to someone of brown complexion. This is from etymology.com. When you look up the word brunette, it says in the first paragraph, of a woman dark in complexion, having a brownish tone to the skin and hair. 1660s, from French brunette, femme or brunette. See, so the word brunette is referring to someone of dark complexion. And if you read in the second paragraph, it says a woman with dark hair, eyes, and of a dark complexion, from 1710. So you see, these are all old definitions. These are not modern definitions. Because when you say the word brunette, automatically in your mind, you're thinking of a white woman with brown hair. When really, the real brunette is you. The real brunette is a so-called black woman. You're the one with the dark hair. You're the one with the brown complexion. This term brunette was used to signify you, not someone who looks like this. So now, going back to the argument, when people like to say King Charles II was called dark because of his dark hair, which proves he's not a black person, he was white, you don't even know that you're actually destroying your own argument. Because Brunette is referred to someone with dark hair and a dark complexion, which is something that King Charles II had. So you're actually basically saying that King Charles II is a so-called black man. So what have we learned? What have we proven? We've proven that through evidence, through textbooks, through images, that the royal house of the Tudors, who descend from King Henry VIII all the way down to Queen Elizabeth I, through their close family relatives, the Stuarts, or shall I say the Swarts, or the Blacks, all the way down from Lord Darnley to King James I, all the way down to King Charles II. We've proven that all these people were black. This is the real image of King Charles II, the person who they call the black boy, and you can clearly see why.